Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Shane Kim. I'm teaching the American Church history, and today actually I'm dealing with some racial issue in the United States, also in the American Church. Uh, as you know, many African American they have lived in this land for a long time. So when we look at the old history from actually 1514, actually some Europeans actually captured a lot of African American, and they export them to the especially North America and South America. So when we look at this map, it starts from the 1514 through 1866. Exactly 1866, actually the slave export was prohibited by whole country. So through around maybe 350 years, many African American they were kidnapped by the white guys, and they were sent to United States and also South America together. When you look at the total actually statistics in United States, around 307,000 slave African American were imported. They were sent by force by the Europeans. And especially when you look at South America, Latin America, look at Brazil, almost over 3 million African American. Actually, they were kidnapped by Europeans, and they were sent to Brazil. So that's why when you travel to Brazil, you can see a lot of African American. Usually, long time ago, only looks like the Mexicans and Spanish. Actually, they live in their lands, and their skin color it looks like a little bit yellow. But by the exports of slavery from the Africa, actually there are a lot of African American. They now living in even South America, Latin America. Now also when we look at the map, or still there are a lot of actually several millions maybe African American live in the United States. So that's a very actually sad story. Long time ago, except the Anglo-Saxon white guys, other peoples are considered of a lower race, like the monkey. Okay, so unfortunately that thing happened long time ago. That's why they kidnap. They even through the net and catch a lot of African American and took them through the ship, and it takes actually several months to across the ocean, and many African American, unfortunately, they die when they cross the ocean. So maybe if you get any chance, try to look at this movie. Maybe already I give some kind of mid-term exam to look at these two movies, and one is 12 Years a Slave. Actually, the story is very short. In the northern part, actually, African American, they are freedmen. They have freedom. But as soon as the slave capture, they arrested the African American, and they made him, even though he was a freedman, but he captured the African American and make them slave. So that's the extremely real story and sad story. And when you also look at the Amistad, when actually the Europeans capture a lot of African American, and they put a lot of actually people in small boat, and it was horrible. It was a horrible situation. Many actually African American died when they crossed the sea. This is a real also story. When if you get any chance, try to watch these two movies. This is great. Instead of sometimes instead of listening to my lecture, sometimes looking at the good movie, that gonna be give you more lesson. That's why. And African American church were established. Especially, I teach about the first Great Awakening and the second Great Awakening. Especially the second Great Awakening has been called the central and defining events in the development of African American church or Afro-Christianity. So through the second Great Awakening, including Charles Finney, actually he preached the gospel not only to the white guys, and even actually he preached the gospel to African American in slavery. So through the second Great Awakening, a lot of actually African American, they start becoming a believer in Christianity. So during this revival, especially Baptist and Methodist converted a large number of African Americans. So finally, even though they are in the slavery situation, but they heard the message of God and they got some hope in Christianity. And but as soon as they go to the church, they witness that white guys still dominated in the church. So many African Americans, even though they go to the church, many were disappointed at the treatment they received from their fellow believer, especially their fellow white believer, because they still lower the African American. The white guys never accept equality with the African Americans. That's right. And at the backsliding in the commitment to abolish slavery that many white Baptists and Methodists had advocated after the African Revolution. Unfortunately, even in the church, even though they preach the gospel to the African Americans, actually they discriminated African American. Even though African American go to the church and they cannot sit with the white guys. One example, maybe the white guys, they sit on the chair in the first floor, but African American, they were not allowed to go to the first floor. So they go up to the second floor without any chair. So the more they go to the church, the more they feel some still racial discrimination even in the church. Maybe we can imagine that. Around 200 or 300 years ago, at the time, only Anglo-Saxon white guys, they dominated the United States of America, and except white guys, other races were considered over like lower races, some kinds of retarded people. So white guys cannot accept the other races with equality. That's why, even though, African American, they were touched by the gospel of Jesus Christ and they go to the church, but they still faced with a strong racial discrimination. But many African American, they start reading the Bible, especially they focus on the book of Exodus. I'm not sure you read the book of Exodus, but the book of Exodus is the second book of the Old Testament. It tells of Israel's delivery from slavery in Egypt through the hands of God. Maybe some of you know, but some of you never get any idea about the book of Exodus. The main story is even though Israel people go to the Egypt and suddenly they become a slave for 100 years. And they cry out to God, God, we are in slavery, and we are tortured, well, we are hungry. Our freedom is forbidden, and we are slaves. Please give us freedom. They start praying to God, and finally, God chose the Moses, and under the leadership of Moses, finally Israel people escape from the Egypt, and Israel people finally become a freed people. So that's the story. Many African Americans, when they read the book of Exodus, they were touched. Oh, okay, God hates slavery. We need freedom as the Israel people getting freedom by the hands of God. In someday, God will lead us to freedom, getting the freedom. We are equal with the white guys. So many African American Christians, they get some idea about freedom or independence from the white guys when they read the book of Exodus. Sometimes, the Bible actually gives a lot of sensational, especially when Christianity was introduced to some kind of hierarchical society. There are so many classes, high upper class and the middle class and the lower class, and many of them are slaves. And in that country, as soon as the Christian message was delivered to that country, they start reading the Bible, they found the freedom, they found the equality. According to the image of God, all human beings were created. So all humans are equal to each other. Finally, African Americans recognized when they read the Bible. And some of them actually start establishing African American church. So when they are discontent, they have a lot of complaint to white churches. That's why. So when this content could not be contained, forceful black leaders formed new denomination. Finally, some African American Christians, they start establishing African American church by themselves. Especially in 1787, Richard Allen in Philadelphia, he was Methodist. At the time, north and south area, little bit different situation. In the northern part, even though African Americans, many of them actually they got freedom. But unfortunately, the southern area, it is agricultural area, so the white guys need a lot of African American slave. So the situation of African American was totally different in the north and south. A little bit in the north area, African American get the freedom, but in the southern area, many of them are slave. That's why Philadelphia actually belonged to the northern part. That's why Richard Allen was a freedman. He had freedom. He was not slave. So in 1787, Richard Allen in Philadelphia broke away from the Methodist Church, because even though he go to the Methodist Church, that church actually dominated by the white guys. And as I said, even African American Christians cannot sit with the white Christians. That's why. So finally, in 1815, Richard Allen founded the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Philadelphia, which along with the independent black Baptist congregation. So usually the Methodist and the Baptist, they preach the gospel to the African American, and many African American were converted to Christianity, and they separate themselves from the white churches, and they established the African American church by themselves. This is one of the examples. And but there was a slavery system in the southern area, and many people actually thinking about that something wrong in slavery system. So some kinds of many scholars actually have some writing about the book about the racial issue. So one of the bestseller book is called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Even though when I was in maybe elementary school, at the time I read this book. This book is extremely famous, and in many countries it was maybe translated into their own language. Even Uncle Tom's Cabin was translated into Korean, so that's why I read this book. The first edition, Uncle Tom's Cabin, published simultaneously on both sides of the Atlantic by American author. So many actually scholars, they interested in a racial issue. This is the first actually edition. Maybe in your country, in your one language, maybe this book also was maybe translated, maybe in my belief. And abolitionism, that means anti-slavery, okay, anti-slavery, oppose against the slavery system. That called abolitionism. In 1680, especially Quakers, maybe previously a little bit talking about the Quakers and the Moravians, maybe in German, and the Mennonites, looks like a Baptist, Quaker, Moravian, and Mennonite. They actually love the freedom, and they also believe in the equality of all human beings. So, Quaker, Moravian, and the Mennonite descent, the people living in Pennsylvania, wrote a 2-page condemnation over the slavery practice and initiate the process of banning slavery in Society of France and Pennsylvania. So they start again, protest against the slavery system, and they freed the African American, especially in Quaker, Moravian, Mennonite. And the Society for the Relief of Free Negroes unlawfully held in bondage was the first American abolition society. Abolition, again, the meaning is anti-slavery, okay, anti-slavery movement formed in 1775 in Philadelphia by the Quaker, who had a strong religious object to slavery. So in this actually religious group, they against to slavery system, and they started the anti-slavery movement throughout the United States of America. And the Quakers, maybe you maybe previously look at this oatmeal. Sometimes, yeah, I eat it. This is very good health. Okay. And they, Quakers and Mennonites and Moravians, advocate to help the persuade numerous slaveholders. So they persuade, okay, freed your African American, they are freed men, please. So that's why they persuade numerous slaveholders in the Upper South to free their slaves. Theodore Wells, a pastor, and another guy called Labat Pubis, freed African American, actually joined Garrison. Garrison is one of the important figure who established anti-slavery society. So in here and there, many people actually recognize that when they read the Bible, actually slavery system is evil. So we should remove slavery system from our society. So they started an anti-slavery movement. So maybe through the actually previous lecture, the Second Great Awakening, maybe many of you remember that Oberlin College, especially Charles Finney actually became one of the most liberal college and accept African American students for the first time throughout the USA history. So especially, yeah, through the Second Great Awakening done by the Charles Finney, actually he led the anti-slavery movement, and this kind of figures, this kinds of organization start anti-slavery movement. And finally, maybe there are several reasons, actually several causes of the American Civil War. Maybe you heard of a Civil War. This is actually looks like the first war in USA between Americans. And when you look at the picture, there is two flags. Left one is southern area, actually some kind of Republic of America flag, and the right one is north part flag. Maybe now we are accepting the right side flag as a national flag, okay? So they fight each other. They kill a lot of people because their north perspective, southern perspective is totally different at the time. So unfortunately, yeah, a lot of people died during the war, and it happened 1861, 4 years. American Civil War was a war fought between the North and South. So because of this civil war, northern south actually they hate each other. Even when I live in New Jersey, around the New York, and when I travel to the southern area, and they call the northern people Yankee. Yankee is actually some kind of low level language actually. They despise the North. And also the North people actually consider southern people redneck. Redneck means neck is your head and body, there is neck, okay? Neck is red. Why? Because they are farmers. So they still hate each other. That's a long history. And maybe one of the cause of hatred to each other, maybe through the Civil War. During their war, they killed so many people, both sides. Civil War began primarily as a result of a long-standing controversy of the slavery issue, actually. There are actually several other issues at the time, some kinds of economical, cultural, political, so many issues. But the slavery issue is one of the one of the best actually cause of the war. And what broke out in April 1861, shortly after Abraham Lincoln, especially Abraham Lincoln. Maybe you may remember him, okay? One of the greatest presidents of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. He had been he was elected as the president, and his promise was he was anti-slavery movement, okay? If I elected as a president, I will remove slavery system in the United States. But and he was elected as a president, so that's why he's starting removing slavery system. And the southern area people, no, we need a lot of slave for our economic, okay, for managing the farming. We need laborers. We need African American laborers. That's why their perspective is totally different. Their economical, especially economical perspective, is totally different. That's why. So Abraham Lincoln had been inaugurated. He was elected as the president of the United States, and they face secessionists of the Confederate state in the South. That's the actual southern areas, another nation's name. Confederate state in the South, and maybe United States of America in North. Two countries. Looks like there was two countries. That's why there is two flags. They fight each other, especially advocating for the state right to uphold slavery. So southern people still wanna keep the slavery system, but northern parts, they are anti-slavery movement. So totally different concept, as I said. And this is the map. 4 years war. Especially when you look at the east side, the blue part is the northern part, and the purple part is the actually southern part, and they fighting each other. And even though the Abraham Lincoln was the president of the United States of America, but it looks like the country has divided to country. At the time, the west area actually, that areas are. Some of the areas belong to the France, and some areas belong to the Mexico at the time. So you can ignore the west part, but when only focusing on the east part, you may see the blue and the purple, and the north and south, they fighting each other. So you can imagine that which part belong to the north and which part belong to the actually south. Actually, you can imagine it. And even during the Civil War, one actually denomination, one example, Presbyterian Church, because of the Civil War, because of the slavery issue, they were divided to denomination. North Presbyterian Church, South Presbyterian Church, even Methodist Church, even Baptist Church, exactly the same. North Baptist Church, South Baptist Church, North Methodist Church, South Methodist Church. Even though before actually slavery issue, they are only composed of one denomination. But one denomination was divided by two denominations because of a slavery issue, especially during the Civil War. So that's why North Church and South Church. By the Civil War, the Baptist Methodist Church split into regional association because of slavery. As I said, Baptist Church divided to North Baptist Church, South Baptist Church. Even Methodist Church, one denomination actually divide. North Methodist Church and South Methodist. Every church, usually many denominations were divided two denominations, North and South, because of the slavery issue. And the abolitionist movement, anti-slavery movement, was strengthened by the activities of free African Americans, especially in the black church. And finally, as you know, Abraham Lincoln won the war. So why the North won the Civil War? So you may see this one, okay? Gettysburg battlefield, a lot of people died, and through the Gettysburg battle, actually the North actually won the war, and finally southern part actually submit themselves to the North part, and they were united again. But the hatred, they hate each other. So even though slavery system was removed, because they are now the Northern actually won the war, and Abraham Lincoln declared that the freedom of African American and the slavery system was removed. There was no longer just in the United States. But even though African American getting freedom from the white guys, but they still has some racism, especially in the southern part. Still there was Jim Crow law. Look at the picture. They southern white guys, they describe African American as a monkey. Look at the picture. African American, they stay with a lion and a lizard, snake, maybe crocodile, a bird, because still many white guys consider African American as a monkey. They are not human. So this actually picture actually has a lot of image. What the image of the white guys against the African Americans. Still, southern part has that kind of Jim Crow law, and it is only 50 years ago. Jim Crow law still exists in the southern part, and the colored entrance. That means the white guys and black guys cannot go to the same school. Cannot go to the even the African Americans, they cannot go to the public school. So there was a restaurant divided by white only and the colored entrance. So even they cannot choose they cannot share the bathroom. Even they took the bus. There was front seat actually belonged to the white, and back seat actually belonged to the African Americans. They called the Jim Crow law in southern area of the United States. So even the African American getting the freedom from the white guys, but still so many African American they actually received the racial discrimination by the white guys, unfortunately. Wow, what is this one? Who are they? Actually, they are called, maybe you heard of KKK, okay? KKK. They actually wearing the mask, and during nighttime they riding horse and go to the African American, burn their house, sometimes attacking African American church, like that. It's still in modern day. They still actually working, okay? They still strongly play a role in the southern area still, unfortunately. So Klux Klan, KKK usually. KKK is American white supremacy group, first formed in the 1860s. So maybe during the Civil War, okay, Civil War. maybe in the first class, actually, I'm talking about, unfortunately, in the beginning of the United States, actually, Anglo-Saxon dominated this area, and many, actually, white guys consider the United States belong to the only the Anglo-Saxon Americans. Actually, they are the owner of the United States. So it is actually Rivera and KKK slogan. Okay, only white guys dominate United States. That's spirituality. That's why they are attacking. They sometimes murder, kill the African American, or sometimes not only African American. So KKK sort of Protestants, white Americans. KKK had advocate extremist racial positions such as white nationalism, anti-immigration, anti-Catholicism. So they are based on the Protestant spirituality, white guys. That's why anti-immigration, anti-Catholicism. So KKK used terrorism. So as I said, sometimes they kidnap African American and they killed, they murdered. And KK actually used the terrorism against group or individual whom they oppose. KK has called for the purification of the American society. What does it mean, purification? That means they make the United States white guy only. Okay, white guy only. That's they got called purification. So except the white people, other people should get out of here, get out of the United States. That's the spirituality of KKK. Unfortunately, sometimes they also had parade in the southern area, still in the modern day, still in present day. So, but even though the African Americans actually they got a lot of racism, but they survived, and they established African American Church. And African American Church become the center of a black community. So 80% of African American, they are Christians. Isn't it amazing? Usually the percentage of maybe white guys, maybe around 60, maybe Asians. I'm not sure about the Asians. Asians maybe lower than 50% of the population, they are Christian. But African Americans, they believe in supernatural power, and they believe in Jesus Christ. And among 10 people, 8 among the 8 people, actually they are Christians. So many African Americans, they become the Christians, and that's why church is one of a stable institution that has existed since slavery. So African American church is not only actually religious institute, also that African American church also provide some protection in the society. So black pastors have impact on political, social organization. So many African American, especially the leadership, actually their leadership actually coming from the pastor. Many African American become the pastor, and they lead the social movement, and they start, or they also holding the anti-slavery, anti-racial movement still. So African American Church provide community support as well as prophetic function. So one of the biggest actually African American denomination is National Baptist Convention USA. Yeah, this is the National Baptist Convention USA Incorporated. That is the biggest African American denomination in United States. So as I said, Baptist preached the gospel to the slave a long time ago. That's why so many Baptist African American become the Baptist. And maybe second one is African Methodist Episcopal Church. Many Methodists also, they preach the gospel. In modern day, because a lot of the Pentecostal movement, Church of God in Christ, that belong to the Pentecostal church. Many actually African American become a Pentecostal. Maybe next time I'm little bit talking about Pentecostal church in the United States. And mainly the African American church not delivering the message of God, but they also uphold the civil rights movement, especially during the 1960s. Maybe many of you already knew who is this guy. He is Martin Luther King Jr. He got the Nobel Prize of Peace, okay? Especially his one of his sermon is "I Have a Dream" speech. That is one of the greatest speech throughout the human history. If you have any little time, maybe around 15-20 minutes, go to the YouTube and just you may write down the Martin Luther Jr. King or "I Have a Dream" speech. Only writing "I Have a Dream" speech. You may hear his voice and his look at the picture. How many people getting together? It is happened maybe around the 1960s. Even though through the Civil War in 1860s, African American already got freedom. They received the equality with the white guys, but unfortunately still, like the Jim Crow law in southern area, still African American receive a lot of racial discrimination. That's why Martin Luther King Jr. he's a Baptist pastor. As I said, Baptist church and usually church play as a role not only the religious institute but also political institute. So that's why Martin Luther King become one of the great leader civil rights movement. All human beings are equal. So if you have available time, try to listen to his speech. You will be touched by his speech. "I have a dream," his speech. But even though there was a civil rights movement during the 1960s, but as you know, still there are a lot of racial discrimination. White policemen kill a lot of African Americans without any cause. So you know that in several years, Black Lives Matter movement arose in many cities, even in Los Angeles, in California also. Unfortunately, that means still there are a lot of racial issues, racial discrimination in the United States. Maybe this issue will be keep going. And actually, yeah, I belong to the Asian. I'm coming from the South Korea, so I'm Asian because of the break of the coronavirus and also the discrimination, racial discrimination against the Asians arose a lot. So there are also another movement to stop Asian hate. Stop it. Every human beings are equal. So fortunately, many Christian church now they support this movement. Many churches, pastors, they agree. Regardless human skin color, everybody is the same equality, same right, because according to the Bible, the first of the Bible, Genesis, talking about human being is created by the image, according to the image of God. So, regardless human skin, we are equal. We have the same right. So that's why, even as an Asian, actually I have a right to live here. So maybe I should support this movement. So, but fortunately, the time goes more. Actually, this kinds of racial discrimination has been removed a lot now. But still, we should support this kinds of movement. And today, I'm a little bit talking about the racial issue, especially focusing on the African American situation in United States. Okay, see you next time. Thank you.